Morena Tata, we're going to kick off now, everybody. So thank you very much for joining. A few people will be joining in the background, but as I said before, if everyone keep their mics off or mute in the interim, that'd be fabulous. My name is Ben Woodham. I'm the manager of the electricity distribution business team, responsible for the price quality regulated electricity distribution businesses, and also leading the reset of the default price path for the period from 2025 to 2030. I'll be chairing the session today. I'd like to formally welcome you to our workshop on innovation and non-traditional solutions, and I'd also like to open us up with a karakia. Give it a second for a few more people to join. Okay, let's kick off. E te whānau, whaia te mataranga kia marama, kia whaia take ngā mahi katoa, tu maia, tu kaha, araha atu, araha mai, tātou kia tātou katoa. All right, if we just want to hop onto the next slide, brilliant. So this workshop is part of the Commission's wider programme to develop draft decisions for the reset of the default price path for the electricity distribution businesses. We refer to this reset as DPP4, and we'll be using that acronym quite a lot today. By participating today, you'll be assisting us with the policy development of an innovation and non-traditional solutions allowance. We will call this INTSA for short. This is something I'm going to stumble over a wee bit today. Many of you will have attended the workshop we hosted last week on the CapEx framework, and we really appreciated the feedback that we gained in that workshop. We also encourage all of you today to share your thoughts with us, that your views can inform how an INTSA could be designed. A few housekeeping points to kick off with. I need to emphasise that everything we present here today is early staff views, so this does not represent the views of our commissioners or any decisions we have made as yet. We had hoped to run breakout groups for the discussions today, but unfortunately this was not possible, learning a lesson from our colleagues in the CapEx workshop last week. So we'll stay together and have 4 separate discussion topics. To this end, you'll see we've amended the agenda that was in the slide pack we distributed last week. I'll also show you that new agenda soon. For transparency, we're going to be recording this session and publishing it to our website. You may wish to forward that recording on to other people who might have an interest in the development of an INTSA, and maybe colleagues who weren't able to join the meeting today. The usual online etiquette is going to apply here today as well, so you're very welcome to raise your virtual hand at any time or post a question in the chat, and the team will be monitoring that chat to make sure that we address as many questions as possible during the workshop. We're aiming to address all of them, but just apologies in advance if we can't get through them all. Any questions that remain at the end will be managed separately by the team. Before I hand over, I'd like to give you some context for the wider work that we're working on today. So we recognise that there is an important opportunity for innovation and non-traditional solutions in DPP4. We're setting DPP4 in the context of a few key factors I'd like to cover off. So increased electrification, climate change impacts, significant cost pressures on electricity distribution businesses, and uncertainty around the need and timing for some investments. This is why innovation and non-traditional solutions are key for DPP4. We need more efficient options and more agile approaches to address network needs for the long-term benefit of consumers. One of the Commission's priorities is promoting proactive asset management and long-term thinking on investment to deliver the level of reliability and resilience that consumers want and need. But to achieve this, we expect EDBs will need to try new things out, run tests and trials, and to scale up the things that work in stages over time. This is where an INTSA can help by supplementing the core incentives within the regime. Your input is then key. We're still thinking about how an INTSA might work and how to apply it in DPP4, so this is the ideal stage for you to provide your views on our early stage policy thinking. We particularly want to hear about the types of innovation and non-traditional solutions projects that could potentially be undertaken, as well as the level of readiness in the sector to do so. Similarly, we need a clearer picture of the potential opportunity for innovation and non-traditional solutions during DPP4, in order to identify where existing incentives to innovate, such as the IRIS efficiency incentive, need an additional stimulus in the form of an INTSA. So this phase in the work will help us design how an INTSA scheme could work. An early view of the proposed principles and characteristics of an INTSA was shared in that DPP4 issues paper that we released in November last year, and your feedback has helped us work through some of what the trade-offs are, and as potential users of an INTSA, your insights today will help us design an INTSA scheme that is fit for purpose, ultimately providing a compelling incentive for EDBs to spend money on trying new things and applying non-traditional solutions. We're working on policy design with the principles and characteristics that we shared in our issues paper. Implementation design will come later on. We're open to the idea in that context of having more than one INTSA scheme, or an INTSA scheme that has options or tiers for projects of a differing nature. In the policy development, we need to be mindful of any implications of competition in the market for flexibility services, and we also need to understand the level of readiness in EDBs to trial innovative projects and non-traditional solutions. So in this workshop, we'll be focusing on the policy settings for an INTSA scheme design, rather than how we can implement it, but we also welcome feedback here or submissions in the workshop for implementation of INTSA later on. In essence, this is a very open stage, and we're really welcome to any ideas or feedback you might have. It's worth me also being clear that substantial transformations would likely fall within a CPP rather than an INTSA application. So for EDBs that are ready to make substantial transformations, such as implementing enduring demand response mechanisms across their entire network, this is a good example of where it may be more appropriate to apply as part of a customized price path. In a CPP, funding for the transformation can be designed to cater for the unique needs of the consumers impacted by and benefiting from the transformation, which is why we consider this to be a more appropriate mechanism in that context. In short, we need to ensure the regulatory regime creates the right incentives for EDBs to use innovation and non-traditional solutions in a way that will ultimately benefit consumers. I'm now going to drop onto the agenda. So our agenda is set up on the screen below, and the rest of the sessions will be hosted by three of the team. Hannah Malik will give an overview of what we see as the need for an INTSA and its role within the DPP regime. Arna Kulharvi is currently seconded to us from Ofgem's Glasgow office. I was going to insert a line about the weather being much better in New Zealand this time of year, but Wellington has got gale force winds and torrential rain outside, so I'm not sure she's currently winning in that trade-off. She will run through a range of the characteristics for an INTSA scheme with a particular focus on the inherent trade-offs between different combinations of settings. And finally, Josh Riley will explain the set of illustrative examples, to show more of how we are thinking about what the policy development of an INTSA scheme could look like. We realise this is a hot topic for the DPP4 reset, and we'd like to hear as much of you as we can. This is why we'll be hosting an open discussion session near the end of the workshop to wrap up anything else you don't think that we have covered within the discussion sessions we're hosting earlier on. I know we at the Commission are very keen to hear from you, as this will help us develop a scheme that works well. So we welcome your comments and feedback at any time. Please just raise your hand or add something into the chat, and we'll make sure we get back to you. Just jumping onto the workshop purpose now. The development of INTSA scheme is a small but significant part of the DPP4, and we need to work with yourselves to get this right, as only EDBs know what they want to use an INTSA scheme for, and other players in the energy sector, of course, have a strong interest too. So we need to hear from you before we can move any further. There will be other opportunities to input on the policy development, particularly at the time when we publish a draft decision paper in May 2024. In that paper, we'll outline a draft scheme, and you will have the opportunity to provide feedback in further detail at that stage too. And your submissions on that draft will influence the final design of an INTSA, which could be introduced in the final determination in November 24 and implemented in April 25. But I'll stop here. Before I stop here, is there anything anyone else would like me to clarify before we start the discussion today? Please just raise your hand or drop something into the chat. I think we're looking pretty clear. I'm going to pass on to Hannah now so she can outline the potential role of an INTSA in DPP4 and the scope of the opportunity we have for the scheme.
Kia ora tātou. My name's Hannah Malik. I'm the Chief Advisor in the Electricity Distribution team working for BEP, and I'm just going to be talking about a bit of an overview about the DPP scheme and how the INTSA might be a good component of it. I do want to also reflect on the things that we talked about in our DPP4 issues paper that we published in November, and also the submissions that we had in response, because we heard some really share with you what we're thinking about what we heard. But for some people who are on this call today, you might not be familiar with the Innovation Project Allowance. Now, that is an allowance which is a part recovery fee for projects that have been completed under the DPP3. So EDBs can apply to us for up to 50% of a recoverable cost for those projects. Now, those projects need to be for innovation only, and there's a very set definition of innovation. And we also have other policy criteria that must be met. Now, under the IPA, we had 2 applications so far under the DPP3. One of those was accepted. And the feedback that we've had from stakeholders in a range of forums, including on the issues paper submissions, was that there may have been many more applications had the policy criteria been quite different. So we really welcome those views, and we're thinking about what we've heard in the development of the INTSA scheme for the DPP4. Now, last year we had the Input Methodologies Review. Now, that was a very large-scale review of the settings that underpin the DPP regime. So in that review, there was a decision made in December, which was slightly after our DPP4 issues paper, and that was to say the IPA had been reviewed and there was a decision to broaden and expand the IPA for the DPP4 onwards, and that was particularly to include non-traditional solutions as well as innovative projects. Now, in recognition of the definition of innovative project being quite narrow, the IM review decision said we really need to think about how we expand that to make that fit for purpose for the next period. So I will take you through 4 slides, and after each of those slides, I'll stop for questions and comments, but I'll move on to the next slide now. So on this slide, we have a circle diagram. The diagram's really to show you that what we want the INTSA to function as is filling a gap between what EDBs can spend their CapEx and OpEx allowances on. Now, EDBs have discretion about how they use those funds, and we've already seen in the DPP period examples of EDBs spending some of that money on non-traditional solutions and innovative projects that they haven't sought for funding from the Innovation Project Allowance. So there's different ways that things can be funded, but we are looking to fill a gap with the INTSA for projects that wouldn't otherwise be funded with CapEx and OpEx allowances. So we're particularly thinking about projects where they might be too risky or they may have a higher potential for failure, that because of that they wouldn't otherwise be funded. They're a bit too risky on that side, or they're a bit too new. You know, they haven't tried that before. They may have seen examples overseas, but there is a bit of a question mark about whether they should do it. Now, this INTSA should provide a compelling incentive to say, well, we're sharing that risk with you. The consumers are sharing that risk with you. And so it should hopefully encourage more potentially risky projects to get off the ground to try and see what actually works in the EDB's regional context. Now, we also are really alive to the fact that some of the benefits that would accrue from projects that could be funded by the INTSA might not be material in the regulatory period. So we're really looking at how we can create an INTSA that actually incentivises projects to be undertaken when the benefits aren't going to turn up, won't be felt real for the customers for potentially 1 or more regulatory periods later. Now, we know that outcomes take a lot longer than outputs, so we're thinking about that as we're factoring our design for the INTSA scheme. Now, I haven't covered a lot here, but what I do want to do is stop just to see if there are any comments or questions based on what I've just outlined on this slide. Got one hand up. Dale, welcome, Dale. Can you introduce yourself before you answer your question?
Sure, Dale from Orion. One question I had for the Commission was how will they view something that was applied for under the allowance that doesn't have a positive outcome in terms of the learnings?
Well, we've been talking about that a few times in meetings recently, actually, and one of the things that we really want to make clear, particularly in this call, is that innovation might not always come to positive benefits, and actually the learnings of something that fails are equally as valuable for other EDBs. So the fact that something might fail shouldn't discourage people from trying things, because we never know what the outcome might be. And also, if you do something that does fail, sharing that knowledge might actually prevent other EDBs going down a path that may not be worth their time. So we do not think of failure as a bad thing in this space particularly. Ideally, things would have positive outcomes, and we would be moving to the next stage of testing and operating environments and scaling things up. But if we can share learnings of early failures, quick fails, then other people can learn from that.
And just to jump on that as well, we're at the very early stage of scheme design here, and there's different options for how we can run things and different options for risk sharing as well. So as we'll probably get onto a little bit later, there are different settings we could play with that might reward or maybe not penalise, but incentivise different behaviours from EDBs depending on the nature of the risky nature of the project. So you could see, for example, a successful project in a certain scheme getting more funding than a non-successful project, and then another scheme actually having no distinction between the success of the project and the amount of funding that's available, because it can depend on the nature of the project and the risk that's being taken on. So I think that kind of question is pointing to the the core of what we're trying to get at today is how can we best incentivize EDBs to drive towards those new solutions, and we're really keen for inputs to get to that later on today as well, Dale.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Dale. Are there any other questions before I move on? One more?
Oh no, there was one hand up.
Okay, well, we'll move on to the next slide. Now, this slide is it's included to show that we're really thinking not only about what we can design for the DPP4, but also how we can incentivize innovative projects and non-traditional solutions in a more enduring way, but also noting that each DPP period, every 5-year period, has quite a different context. And so when we're designing the INTSA now, we're hoping that it will endure into DPP5, but we also note that DPP5 is a time for us to stop and reflect and look at what happened during the DPP4 period and understand what needs to be adjusted so that it can remain fit for purpose for the DPP5. Now, we know that the context is quite different now between DPP3 and DPP4, and we have our IM decision that supports what we're doing. But one thing about the IM decision is that it allows us to put the policy criteria for the INTSA scheme in our DPP determination. So we don't need to wait for another 7 years for the IM to be reviewed again. We can update our DPP determination when we see fit, and the reset is a definite period where we would be taking that review. Now, when we do take that review, we want to be looking back at the experience of what happened with the INTSA scheme and the DPP4 so that we can learn from that. And so ideally, we're putting our crystal ball out, we're looking 5 years in the head, and we're wondering, will we see more projects? Will we see a wider range of projects? Will we see more examples of collaboration, both between EDBs, but also with third-party providers? Will we be seeing EDBs developing more capability in the space of innovation and non-traditional solutions? We hope to see all of those things, and that will really help us to refine the policy settings so that in DPP5 we can see an evolution or a maturation from a period of time where we've seen lots of tests and trials and research about things to a space where we're seeing more actual testing in operating environments, and we're seeing the scaling up of ideas that have worked well. So we're hoping to see all of that. But what we are not expecting is that every single EDB will be an early adopter of change. We know that every EDB is quite different. We do hope that the EDBs that are making those big significant jumps in their ideas about trying new things, that the learnings are shared and that people learn from that. But we also know that with the new definition of, with the innovation project allowance definition kind of going out the window and different policy settings and the introduction of the non-traditional solutions, we're not expecting everything to be a new thing. So we will expect that people will be learning from each other and trying the same thing, but in their own unique environment. So that's this slide. And now, would anyone have any questions or comments related to the slide before I move on? Dale. Welcome, Dale.
Hello again. Just one question that had been exercising our mind was how the Commission thinks about the innovation allowance in relation to related parties. So, for instance, if, say, a related party of Ryan had an innovation idea that we wanted to partner on, would that be acceptable under the allowance?
I might jump in on this. So I think that definitely points to kind of a trickier element within the regime, and particularly within the importance of competition, which is something I touched on before. We'd want to look at that, and we are planning on looking at that in more detail as we progress through the policy work here. And I think what we'd really value is some examples to be pushed through in your submissions afterwards of exactly the kind of transactions that you might consider. And we're very happy for those to be labelled confidential as well, so that we can look at that in context of the outcomes we're trying to deliver and the context of the regulatory regime. So in short, I'm kind of not answering your question right now, Dale, but very, very keen to hear, and just to other stakeholders on the call, if you've got things that you think might be on a grey area of what we're trying to achieve, please put it in, because we've been very clear as the outcome we're trying to achieve here.
Okay, so I'll move to the next question, which is from Kawakawa. Kawakawa Room, which I believe is a team from Vector. Welcome.
Yeah, hi. It's Richard from Vector here. Just a question in regards to benefits. At the beginning of the presentation, you talked about the benefits to consumers. And then in this slide, we've talked about collaboration and maybe benefits for third parties. Obviously, some of the solutions, like with demand side management, could be facilitating third parties, say retailers and other people, to provide services. So how will the Commission assess benefits? And as part of that benefit assessment, will they be looking at a whole of energy system sort of cost reduction angle, or will they be looking purely at the maybe benefits that sit just within the siloed electricity distribution sector of the supply chain?
So the regime is definitely limited to electricity line services as that core constraint. So we certainly wouldn't be looking to break out of our legislative constraint in terms of how the directive regime is run, would be my most direct answer to that. But at the same time, partnering with a retailer, for example, in a way that could deliver a project that had electricity line services benefits and wasn't ultimately the core benefit was in that area, but you had third parties that were outside of that regime, that would be something we'd be interested in hearing a bit more about as an idea, definitely. But I've got to be very clear in terms of that kind of services.
Yeah, we also have a question in the chat from Lone Nyogan. Now, so the question I'll read out for the group is, what is the driver for adding non-traditional in the name of the new scheme? Any risk that it can even as have a counter effect that EDBs are discouraged due to the pressure of doing something that has to be non-traditional to apply? Now, the reason that we've said non-traditional, and this is part of the IM decision there, is that what we have seen and what has been pointed out by some international consultant firms is that if we do more of the same, if we expand our grid capacity by simply adding more infrastructure, we are missing a bit of a trick. So there are different ways to do things. There are different ways to solve problems. So non-traditional just means anything other than adding to the grid in traditional capacity ways. Now, did you want to add to that?
Actually, say that's the loop. That's actually that. I think if you're doing something that you don't think is non-traditional, you don't think is innovative, then we probably don't want you to be applying for this scheme. It's directly set up to be pushing the boundaries of where we can drive new benefits for consumers. And if something is a bit more mainstream, we've already been clear within Hannah's earlier slide, there is considerable flexibility within core OPEX and CAPEX allowances to spend funding on projects. We don't set the individual projects that the individual EDBs need to be spending their revenue on. So in that context, if something maybe was a little bit of a grey area between traditional and non-traditional, we'd probably be looking to EDBs to be just doing that project as part of their BAU. It's for the things that are different, for the things that are riskier, that's what we're looking for to be coming through in this scheme.
Thanks for that question. So I'll pass on to my next slide. Now, I just want to recall back to the issues paper, which we published in November last year. And at that time, we were looking over the fence at the IM review, and we were looking at what they were thinking about in terms of the IPA and how it could turn into an INTSA. We hadn't had a decision yet, but we did present in the issues paper the idea that, well, we are already thinking about this. We're thinking about the principles underlying the scheme and the characteristics. Now, the principles are what we think of as the intention for the scheme. If we set that intention, then the characteristics need to be aligned to that intention and deliver on it. So first of all, we presented 5 proposed principles, and they are laid out on the slide. The things that we heard in response was, firstly, generally an agreement to those 5 principles. So we were happy to hear that, but we were also just as happy to hear some new suggestions for principles. So we heard suggestions around expanding the nature of definitions in a range of ways, which was really helpful to hear different perspectives on how we can look at different definitions. So we about working with third parties, which Ben has also just responded to a question about. So thank you, Contact, for that suggestion. And looking at third parties doing something different, so something that might be quite unique. And so that's what this scheme is hopefully trying to be really an avenue for. We also heard from Orion about the concept of novelty. And so, looking at new and existing ideas, data, technology partners, but also thinking about novelty in different ways other than just presenting, this is a new idea just for one little thing. It's actually thinking about other things that could be novel at different different ways of looking at systems and processes, but we don't want to restrict to novelty. We don't want everything to have to be new. And one of the, the extension of things to the non-traditional solutions is really focused on, if you've seen something that works elsewhere, we really want to see you trying it. So the innovation part of it, we have decided to get rid of the definition of innovation project. So one of the things we're thinking about is, should we have a definition at all, or should we be relying on EDBs to, when they're presenting their applications, for them to make the case for why something is innovative? That would be probably the better way. So also with the suggestions, we did hear the concept of risk coming up, which is very valuable. We are looking at risk as kind of one of the core factors that we need to really ensure our policy criteria deals well with, because this is a risk for EDBs, it's a risk for consumers, and we want to make sure that that balance is right. One of the things that we really, in filling that gap, we're focusing on additionality. And additionality means, the project being considered might not otherwise have occurred if there wasn't a really specific incentive for it. So we were really happy to hear a lot of comments about additionality coming through the submissions. And we've included one here from Wellington Electricity, just to say that we're really listening to the things that you're saying, and those are filtering through to our policy thinking. And this is also a forum today for you to give any other advice or feedback that we can factor into that thinking. So I'll stop talking there, and if anyone has any questions or comments, welcome them now. Oh, okay, great. So Kawa Room, Victor, welcome.
Oh,
you need to unmute your room.
There, Richard.
Sorry. Technology's failing. Just in regards to the low cost and DPP, the Commission in the IM review rejected proposals from stakeholders around the concept of sandboxing, which would allow, I suppose, flexibility around some of the regulatory rules to enable you to experiment a little bit more. So is it fair to say that if you had an innovation project, like you could be running something with pricing, which might require more flexibility from the DPP determination or the IMs, that you're forced into a CPP application for those type of innovative projects, because the Commission would not be open to flexing the current regulatory settings for an innovation project?
I might let the team jump in after me for a sec to clarify anything else, but I don't think we quite rejected sandboxing as much as said there's scope within the DPP for sandboxing. So on quality, for example, is an area where we felt we had the power to make decisions about sandboxing without any IM change being required. I'd be interested in maybe those examples where there might be constraints within the DPP or IM regime that could affect innovation in retail pricing. We are working quite closely with our colleagues at the EA as well, Richard. But yeah, I think that's something maybe be really keen for you to give us some examples on again afterwards, or even now, but ones that we'd be keen to follow up with you on, and where you think there might be constraints around what the regime does in that area.
Yep, cool. Thanks, Ben. We'll do that.
Cheers, Richard.
And that we will have a written submissions period after this, so we really welcome things like that coming through, and particularly when it relates to examples, the types of projects you want to do. That's the number one thing we need to hear about, because we need to design a scheme that can accommodate the things that you actually do want to do. That's really important to us. So I will move on to our next slide. So this is the partner slide to the principles, where we talk about the characteristics. Now, if we set those principles well, we need to get the characteristics together to implement those. And what that means is, for every 8 of these characteristics, we can set them in different ways, and together that would form the policy criteria for the INTSA. Now, the criteria, or the characteristics here, there's 8 of them. They are quite interrelated in a lot of ways, and so in the next session, Anna is going to explain what we're thinking around how they relate to each other and what the trade-offs are between. But for now, I'll just outline how we talked about them in the issues paper. So we presented them, we explained what they were, and we gave an indication of how the current innovation project allowance is set against them. And we also showed that there are a range of settings that we can choose, so we are not beholden by the way the IPA was set. We can do things quite differently this time. And so when we put that in the paper, we heard some really helpful suggestions from our submitters. We also heard a lot of support for what we had there. For example, we heard that, we don't currently use a penalty reward mechanism for our IPA, and there's no real support for having one in the future. That might be something that we would consider in a more mature level of the scheme, but we know that we're not going from 0 to 10 in the next INTSA. We're moving to something that's reasonable for the context that we're in. So the suggestions we had, particularly around the first one, was we have a definition of project type, and Richard, Victor, you'll be pleased to hear that the definition of project type there, we do believe is quite narrow, and so we've heard some perspectives on how it needs to be broadened, and that's one thing that we're currently looking at. It does have to be in the nature of the regulated services, though, because that is our mandate, as Ben has outlined. In terms of some of the conditions, we've talked a few times about the sharing of learnings. We did hear a lot from our submitters that they really value that concept, and we would expect to be including that concept in the policy design going forward, because we all want to be hearing collaboration happening between the EDBs, and particularly the sharing of learnings being taken up by others. We did hear a lot about how people need a bit more help to get through the process in terms of developing a guide, and that's one thing that we'll be considering when we're doing our implementation design. Now, we need to do the policy criteria design first, and then with the implementation design needs to be really carefully considered to make sure that we're implementing this well. One thing we heard from in the submissions, which we put a quote here from Solar Zero, is that there is an idea that maybe there needs to be a coordinating function for the the INTSA allowance. And we do recognise that for each EDB being experts in their own region and making their own decisions about what they're doing, they also are actually having a national view, and you're part of the ENA looking at, we're in a national energy transition here. And so we expect that some of the applications will be talking to the energy transition and how they're contributing to moving forward, particularly by trying things new and using the allowance to fund those projects. So I will pause here for any questions or any comments before we move on to the next session. Okay, we'll close session 1 and we'll move to session 2. Session 2 will be presented by Anna Kolhavi, who we have borrowed from Ofgem, which has been very timely and very welcome for us. So she will be explaining more about these characteristics, but in particular the trade-offs that we're considering between them. So thank you for your feedback.
Hi everyone, kia ora tātou. My name's Anna Kolhavi, and as Ben has hinted, I've escaped the dark Scottish winter, if not the rain. I'm on a short secondment from Ofgem, the UK energy regulator, and I have the pleasure of working with Hannah and Josh on the innovation workstream while I'm here. Earlier we've heard that EDBs may not innovate or adopt non-traditional solutions if these are riskier than business as usual without specific support to do so. We also heard that this submission is likely to be to the detriment of consumers in the longer term. So the DPP4 provides an opportunity to address this gap. And the aim of this session is to look at how the characteristics of an INTSA could be set to secure the long-term benefits for consumers. So today we're really keen to hear your feedback about the characteristic settings, and it's there's been some really good engagement to date so far. So please continue, and I think particularly to kind of explore some of the potential trade-offs that those settings might have for both consumers and the EDBs. We can move to the next slide, please. So the design and settings of an INTSA scheme are important because they could affect, one, the effort that the EDBs put into developing innovation projects and non-traditional solutions. Two, the overall scheme costs and the efficiency of the outturn costs for those projects they're undertaken. The risk burden for consumers that net costs arise from an INTSA scheme. And I think overall, we're more talking about, we recognise there may be some instances where a project is not successful, but what we're looking for is net benefits overall. And so of course 4 is, how do we set those characteristics so that we've got a pretty good scheme that's going to be delivering those net benefits realised for consumers overall. The design of an INTSA scheme really needs to occupy that sweet spot. So it needs to enable the EDBs to experiment with new ideas and non-traditional solutions, and at the same time mitigate and manage to an acceptable level the potential risk for consumers that is inherent in funding projects that are riskier than business as usual. So the potential risk burden for consumers is a key consideration in setting the characteristics of an INTSA scheme. And the settings will depend a lot on the risk profile of the projects that might come forward or are expected to come forward. Funding lots of small-scale projects is likely to be less risky than funding fewer larger projects. And that's because the risk of non-success overall is reduced by having greater diversity in a larger project portfolio, and the potential impact of a single project not succeeding is less significant because it's a small proportion of the funding commitment overall. So I think it's pretty easy to see that two or more INTSA schemes could be developed with quite different settings if they are targeting projects or solutions that have different risk profiles, even though both schemes have the same aim of managing the risk burden for consumers to an acceptable level and supporting the EDBs to try new ideas for consumers' benefit. We see in other jurisdictions, such as the UK and Australia, that regulators have adopted multiple schemes to stimulate innovation and non-traditional solutions. And typically the differences in those schemes' design reflect differences in the potential risk burden arising from the types of projects being targeted. Typically, the higher the risk and the potential impact of non-success, the more stringent the protections that are applied in the scheme. So from my background, from working with Ofgem and the Rio Price Control, the regulator in the Rio Price Control, we've actually adopted a tiered or step-up style approach to innovation and supporting innovation. The first tier, the Network Innovation Allowance, is a low hurdle scheme. It targets small-scale innovations. It operates as a user or loser allowance, and the network company self-certifies a project meets the funding eligibility criteria. At the other end of the scale, the Strategic Innovation Fund is a high hurdle scheme for larger, more complex flagship projects that are focusing on the big net zero challenges. In the Strategic Innovation Fund, companies must submit project proposals to an external expert panel for quite a rigorous assessment, and the regulator must approve the proposal before any expenditure adjustment is made for the project. Another important consideration for designing an INTSA scheme in New Zealand is the context of the default price path regime. The characteristics need to be set in a relatively low way for DPP4. Therefore, it's not intended that an INTSA scheme or schemes brought forward under the DPP would be suitable for all possible innovations and non-traditional solutions that could be trialled in the next price path. So I'll just take a moment there because I've only really got one slide, but I've spoken a lot, so I'd like to just check in if anyone has any questions or comments about what I've said so far. Okay, moving on now, I'd like to run through some of the setting options. The issues paper set out a range of potential settings for each characteristic, and in the slide we've highlighted some of these. So the approval timings, that is when the EDB has certainty its project will receive some support under an INTSA, could be set so that it's either an ex ante or ex post process. The approved expenditure could be based on a forecast of the project costs, or it could be based on actuals, or potentially a mix of the both. The share of project expenditure that would be recoverable under the price path could be high, similar to the Rio Network Innovation Allowance, where 90% of expenditure on a project is recoverable, or it could be set at that lower share, such as 50%, as is the case in the DPP3's Innovation Project Allowance. The maximum permissible expenditure could be set as a high or low cap and given either as an absolute dollar value terms or as a percentage of the allowed revenue over DPP4. And supporting evidence and scrutiny requirements could take many forms, including self-certification of eligibility, cost-benefit analysis, maybe using an agreed framework for looking at the benefits that are relevant for the provision of line services. So really providing that clarity, perhaps an independent expert review or an post benefits reporting style. So there's lots of options in that space as well. But given the wide range of options that we have for setting the characteristics, the choice of a setting can involve trade-offs. So I'd like to take a look at a couple of examples. So an ex-ante approval setting would provide funding certainty to the company upfront that a project is eligible for support under an INTSA. However, it commits consumers to additional cost when the benefits of a project are uncertain and there is always a risk of a net cost. If the company needs to obtain that ex-ante approval from an external party, such as the Commission or a third-party expert, it would likely add administrative cost to a project, and these are typically not scalable. So, these come at a fixed cost. And the EDB will also need to build an additional lead time to deliver that, get that approval and then deliver the project. And these together could make a project uneconomic or limit the EDB's flexibility to adapt the project should there be changes in the circumstances. So there's quite a number of tensions there that we have to think about. Looking at another example of a trade-off, let's say that approved expenditure is set on the basis of forecast costs. This setting gives cost certainty for consumers and provides a strong efficiency incentive on the EDB to deliver a project or solution on budget. However, if there's low confidence in the cost forecast, and that could be because the project is novel or the EDB has very limited experience in that type of activity, then an EDB might consider there's a high risk of exposure to a cost overrun and unfunded expenditure under a forecast setting. This could reduce the EDB's appetite to undertake novel projects and non-traditional solutions, and consumers could miss out on those potential benefits, net benefits. In addition to the individual characteristics, it's also important to consider the interactions between settings and the overall cumulative impact from a combination of settings. Different combinations can address or balance out a possible trade-off that might arise under another setting. So they work together, and we'll be looking at that quite closely. So taking another example, let's say a low hurdle is adopted for the approval or scrutiny characteristic. And this has been chosen to reduce the admin costs and allow an EDB more flexibility to pivot or adapt a project for changing circumstances. A low hurdle setting, such as allowing an EDB to self-certify a project's eligibility, could by itself increase the potential for marginal projects to be funded under an INTSA. This in turn might be expected to increase the potential risk burden on consumers in the form of inefficient spend or net costs. So projects that have less, they just potentially don't provide the benefits that we want to deliver for consumers. However, if we step back and look in the round, this risk could be managed through strengthening another characteristic of the scheme. So you still get the flexibility of the scheme, but you're trying to strengthen some other aspect just to bolster the benefit or the strong scrutiny of projects. So in the example above, this could be achieved by adopting a condition that that receipt of expenditure is contingent on the EDB reporting about the realised net benefits when the project is completed. So I think there could be many complementary setting combinations so that an INTSA scheme is neither too risky for consumers, or at least manages the risk to an acceptable level. And I think it's not that we're trying to drive every risk out of an INTSA, because that's what we're trying to target. So I just want to make that very clear. But it's also important that the project, the scheme, is not too onerous for the EDBs. And Josh is going to be looking at some of those illustrative examples in session 3. But I think for the remainder of the session, we would really like to hear from you, and we'd really like to hear how you think that characteristics of an INTSA scheme should be set to find that middle ground. So if we just go to the next slide, where we have got some discussion topics. So we're really keen to hear from you about, one, which characteristics and settings matter most to you and the pipeline of projects that you maybe are considering for DPP4, and what and why. And why are these important for those projects? And we also invite views on some of the suggested discussion questions on this slide. So it's really over to yourselves to contribute in this space.
I might jump in and just say we're really keen to hear from those maybe who've looked at the IPA particularly, and any views on how those settings worked. I know a couple of the EDBs worked quite closely, and the change we drove last year around the timing of the independent engineering report was a really good example. And maybe conveniently, we've got Vector coming on the line with Carol with a question now.
Susanna from Vector. For us, probably one of the key ones is the recoverable amount. So the percentage, the 50% recoverable funding for EDBs. You really have to look at the whole kind of business decision that you're making in terms of going for an application. If only 50% is recoverable, you're also looking at a post-approval. So you don't have certainty you'll actually get the project approved. But you're also spending money on a suitable specialist. So all those things combined, you really would want to go for the projects that you're very certain about, and thus taking away the propensity for more riskier projects. So that was one of the key ones for us, and maybe increasing that to 90%, 75% potentially. But yeah, just to advance those smaller, riskier projects, which in DPP4 you could see a proliferation of, given the need for more kind of innovation in the energy transition space.
And that's a really interesting one for us, actually, because it's kind of touching on what Anna was talking to. You could see around where you might offer 90% funding, but the amount of money on offer is still relatively small, but you're guaranteed a greater recoverable share of that funding through the project, which would then encourage those riskier but small scale projects, still mitigating the risk to consumers, which kind of lines up around what the IPA is in terms of the amount of funding that's available, which is capped at a relatively low amount.
Sean here, Ben. I noticed there's a few here from PowerCo, Karen Frew and Rhino and Michael O'Brien, and I know you guys are doing some pretty good innovation. Is there anything you'd like to share from your experience? That's a would you like to as a please share. Karen, Rhino and Michael, are you there?
Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Good, thanks. Thanks, Rhino.
I wasn't actually prepared. I mean, so far we obviously haven't applied for any assistance under this, so we've been deliberately funding our innovation projects as part of a special board allowance. Our board, following our CPP reset, we weren't particularly successful in getting an innovation allowance, sort of said, but it's so important to them that they're prepared to put up a certain amount of money from their own sort of funding, and that's been used predominantly to drive our projects. I'm very keen, obviously, that it should be a more sustainable sort of regulatory setting as is proposed here. And I think the other thing that we're very keen of is to see how we can share that, because there's a lot of duplication happening around the industry, and I think the very essence of this sort of scheme should be that yes, it's public money we're using our consumers' money to fund projects, so therefore the information very much should be then widely shared across the whole of the industry. That would be sort of our overriding approach to this.
But some of the things you're seeing there, Rhino, and your innovation, do you think these actually line up, and you could do that through that sharing mechanism, and you could see what you're doing and line up for these sort of a scheme? Does it link?
I think so. Yes. I mean, it's the scheme in its original form we didn't find particularly attractive, which is why we pretty much went on our own. Although we have been working with the ENA and the Future Network Forum and various other forums as well. But absolutely, the work we're doing, I think, is to the benefit of the whole of the industry. We haven't really seen the need to keep it just for ourselves. There will be commercial sensitivity from some of the providers, and we always have to be careful in that. But I think the overall objectives within the regulated framework is for sharing with everyone.
I think there
Okay.
was a really good point raised around the sharing of learning and how to really leverage off every every dollar that is spent on innovation. How do companies leverage off that, work together, co-generate, cooperate, collaborate? What can I ask? What would have you had any thoughts about what type of mechanism or what type of initiative and whether that could drive that sort of very much a shared learning platform?
I can tell you certainly, and this my idealistic view of the world is that there needs to be a lot better coordination between across the whole industry. Now, how you provide that is you can look at it. I mean, does it get led from the Commerce Commission? Does it get led from the ENA and so on? But I'd start at the front end, and somehow we need to avoid the duplication. So we know these common themes are things that we're all looking at, and we're all looking to see, for example, how flexibility services could play a bigger part in our solutions and so on. But if we can somehow coordinate these projects amongst the utilities, I think that'll be a reasonable starting place. To then avoid the sort of situation we have multiple similar projects, and yes, I know we will come back and share the findings. But if it is a sort of shared industry project right from the start, I think the sharing at the back end becomes so much easier as well. So I really would that'll be sort of my ideal world. Now, again, I've had discussions around this with colleagues across the industry for a long time, and I know that our drivers differ. But well, you asked me my view, so that's pretty much where I'm at.
Thank you very much. I think we've got another question. It's Evie Trelove. Could you please just introduce where you're from?
Kia ora, I'm Evie. I'm working at Orion and previously worked for UK Power Networks and the ENA. So I just wanted to agree with Susanna's points around the share of expenditure. I think that's a great point. And I'd just add to that, I think the current rules, the 50% has to be funded by the EDB, whereas in the UK, that other contribution can be funded through an external mechanism. And I think that's really valuable as well, just making sure that you can pool funds from multiple different areas to leverage that. One of the characteristics I wanted to respond to in particular, or feel quite strongly about, is characteristic 5 on when and what conditions need to be approved. I think one of the massive benefits of the UK model, which also helps with Rhino's point around duplication, is having that self-certification really transparent at the start of projects. I also think that the peer review type approach that they take with the Smarter Networks portal and putting the PEAs on there and giving other EDBs a chance to kind of peer review also is a great model. And for certain projects, that might be more appropriate than a independent report. So I think, yeah, those are a couple of points that I think are really great. And then just on the information sharing one as well, I think both the Arena's Knowledge Bank and the Smarter Networks portal in the UK are incredible resources. We've seen signs of moving towards that sort of direction from a number of different parties, including ENA, EEA, Flex Forum, making information transparent. So I think, yeah, there's an appetite there. It's just about sort of bringing that together a bit more, I guess.
Completely agree. I guess given that there are, growing international resources, is there, obviously off New Zealand or the EDBs in New Zealand, there is really an opportunity to really benefit from what is quite a substantial resource now that there's been innovation funding and work in that area for at least 10, 15 years in the UK. I wonder to what extent are people kind of recognising or being able to make those contacts that they need with maybe their counterparts overseas to really benefit, I think. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. Obviously, there might be cases where that needs to be looked at because there are slightly different circumstances. But yeah, just thinking, how do you bring that learning into your organisation when you're looking at your work programme?
Yeah, it's hugely beneficial because it's visible, it's easily searchable. A lot of the work that has been done, or that I'm involved in at the moment, is also looking at, well, has this been done overseas? So doing searches on those resources. In some cases, it is reaching out to people where they've got project reports or contacts that you want more information. But often there's enough there to kind of get the gist of what's been looked at. And because they do have good progress reporting and close down reports, generally you can relatively easily digest what the impact of the projects has been at an individual level, but also at a portfolio level, because all of them, all of the networks have to do the annual summaries, which then gives you that more lifted view of which ones have actually sort of delivered the most benefit, and which ones maybe haven't been as successful. Yeah, so I think those resources and that reporting are really good, but also, yeah, that self-certification piece at the start for the right size projects is incredibly valuable and would help stimulate so much more innovation into the pipeline.
Great. Right, we've got quite a few other questions, so I'm just going to look at the sequence. Fortunately, Teams monitors that for us. So I think Russell Shaw, you're next, so feel free to come online.
Hi there. I just wanted to give you a bit of an update on what we are trying to do through the ENA around some of the learning from these projects. So I'm the Chief Executive of Top Energy, but I also sit on the board of the ENA, and we're trying to take quite a deliberate course of action around increasing the sharing of learning. So that's including things like study trips. So we've got, I think, about 50 people going across to Adelaide in a couple of weeks' time, including chief executives and chairs, to try and lift the awareness and learning there. We have the Future Network Forum, the study trips. The idea is that we'll do a New Zealand study trip every second year with a symposium where we bring speakers into the country and the years in between. We've got the Future Network Forum, and we've significantly increased the funding of that. And I think the funding of that will increase again. And that's about sharing the learning of what is going on, what's going well, and taking the sort of outputs that Rhino and others have talked about and ensuring that that's available to a broader group, and including learnings from places like the Edison Electric Institute, and having more people attend the conferences and the webinars that they have, and they've proven an excellent resource too. So I think in general, we're trying to get better at sharing. I think there's been some really, really good initiatives and trials that have gone on within companies, and then I think we're not particularly good at then rolling them out into the broader market. So we've certainly identified that, and we've got to focus on improving.
I just, it's probably more for a bit of background for me in terms of the ENA's role in coordinating the research agenda or the strategy. Is that a sort of a regular annual process?
So we have the Future Networks Forum, and that's taken over from sort of the electricity network roadmap that we've had.
Thank you. Great. But a few more questions, so I'm just going to pass on to Jonathan State. Thanks.
Good morning. I was just reflecting on Rhino's comment earlier and thinking that there's actually, just on that reflection, there's different types of projects that require, I guess, different levels of sharing and engagement. And just off the top of my head, the first one, sort of, you've got your research projects, and those ones are typically regional specific. So you're wanting to say, how does this solution work in our context? But then when you get on to what I'd call sort of more implementation projects, and you're starting to talk about things like, I'll say, data access protocols, or ways that this can now be made operational on a wider scale, that's definitely where I'll say where I think you should be sharing and sort of engaging from the start. So I think it is, I guess my thought was there's a bit of horses for courses in terms of what type of project you're looking at.
I think that's very clear from our review and thinking about how the characteristics do need to take into account the types of projects that would be coming forward, and basically tailoring to those specific characteristics or circumstances. Right, I think I've got maybe one more question, and then we'll probably move on to the next session. So again, is that another hand from Vector, the Vector team?
Yes, Richard from Vector again. Just a question picking up on Reno's earlier comment around collaboration. I would be interested to understand from the Commission if they would consider that the DPP and the CPP mechanisms lend itself to multiple parties working together on an innovation project. Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but in the IM review, multiple party CPPs was sort of rejected, or single issue CPPs. So I'm just interested in how the Commission would envisage that collaboration working. Would individual parties need to put in separate applications under the DPP or CPP, or would there be enough flexibility in this mechanism to allow joint applications or joint adjustments of the price path, etc.?
So it's actually something we've actively been discussing as a policy team. Is that kind of sweet spot between a CPP style rebuilding of your entire network versus a collaborative INTSA based scheme that's still fairly substantial. And we certainly at this stage are not ruling out that kind of collaborative based approach across multiple EDBs, and it's something we're thinking about more. And I guess we'd definitely be interested in, I guess, again, touching on what Hannah said, examples of how you think that might work, so we can throw that against the regime and see where there might be issues that could arise. The key thing I think we'd say is the way the core objective of the IMs did effectively for us is give us more flexibility in terms of INTSA, and we are keen to use that and figure out the best ways we can use that in the ways that could deliver the greatest returns as well. So the short version of my answer, Richard, is definitely we're not ruling it out at this stage in terms of our work, and we'd definitely be interested in hearing from you as to how that could work. And we can see how much time we've got later on as well, actually, as to whether we want to talk about that in a bit more detail and see what we're kind of grateful for the fact we've got EDB and non-EDB stakeholders on this call, so we could have a bit of a discussion about that later and see what people think about how that could work from their point of view as well. So I'll put a proverbial pin in that one if we've got a bit of time towards the end. But otherwise, we definitely welcome ideas from you and non-EDB stakeholders on how those kind of multi-party transactions could work, multi-party applications could work.
Right, thanks. Thank you, Ben. We've just got one question in the chat that's come from Lon Nguyen, which is, what does good look like for INTSA, and how do you assess the impact on consumers, gains versus risks? I think earlier in the first session, Hannah really spoke about the evolution of an innovation stimulus in the DPP type regime, and what we might be, how we might overall assess what good looks like for INTSA is to see that progression, to see there's greater participation and involvement, to see some of those more non-network solutions be coming forward and being trialled. So I think it will be needing to put and recognise that there are some types of projects and solutions that will need this additional stimulus, and actually to seeing those come forward through post project completion reports, being able to see what was successful, what was learned, how those are then taken forward to the next stage. I think in terms of trying to assess the impact on consumers, gains versus risks, a lot of that is for the EDBs who are developing projects, who will be putting forward proposals, to be thinking, well, how do I stage this particular? I know the direction I want to get to. I know the outcome I need to get to. But actually, are there ways I can stage a particular project or innovation in order to be able to take, get some learning, able to establish whether the options that I think are feasible are panning out or performing well, or are there new issues that I need to look at? So I think it would be very much be a lot of that balancing that impact for consumers will be about the development of those project proposals that in some situations really need to be taken forward sort of in staged or bite-sized pieces, probably not quite the right word for innovation, but obviously recognising that to sort of technical readiness level and moving her through the innovation process. So, and the scheme should, the INTSA scheme or an INTSA schemes should be able to support that evolution and development through having, suitable arrangements that can allow that project progression or the innovation. So I think it's those are the types of things that we'd be wanting to build into the scheme to be able to get those checkpoints and to start to see it driving the sort of activity that we expect would result in the long-term outcomes. Right. Is there one more question or comment?
Quick hand up from John.
John Campbell. And I think this will be the last one, and I have to move on to my colleague Josh for the third session.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, look, and probably we'll come back to it in the last session because I think Ben indicated I wanted to just throw my support behind the wider discussion from a non-EDB perspective. I'm John from Our Energy. So we're a party that would, we've been working on an innovative project to work alongside EDBs in the past 6 months or so. And one of the issues that we've faced in that process is this, what I call a coordination risk being expressed, this idea of, EDBs not wanting to go it alone. So yeah, really interested in coming back to that wider discussion later in the session around how to encourage through this scheme the sort of the multi-party approach. I think that's really critical, and perhaps even more critical in New Zealand, in a place where we have 29 EDBs across a relatively small population. Yeah, and
I'll just jump in.
Context is really important.
And just jumping in on that, John, I think there's two quick things I'd say back is only 16 of the EDBs are constrained by the regime, so to speak, in there. So so this is me with my own biases. I care about the 16. The full 29 are responsibility of other bits of ComCom, so I'm selfish in that way. But also, I would say we're not constrained in terms of, like, we're trying to be quite collaborative, and even if we end up with it, whatever settings we end up with this regime, we're definitely welcome conversations with non-EDB entities like yourself to help you understand how we would like applications to run, the kind of things that work in a good application, because we understand there's significant benefit there. In the end of the day, it'll still be the EDB making that application, but there's nothing to stop you from coming and saying, hey, we've done this before with 3 others, don't worry, we've got it under control, we can help get you across the line. That's something we'd definitely be happy to have those kind of conversations. And I think we're particularly grateful to just the EDBs in the last 12 months that have really been coming to us on the IPA with similar kind of questions around how does this work? How can we get that across the line? And that's been really fruitful from our point of view as well. So thanks for the question, John.
Right. So thank you all for your participation and feedback on the session. Lots of great ideas coming forward and comments that we can take away, and we'll certainly be looking out for further information or in your submissions. So now I'm going to pass over to Josh Riley, who will present on session 3. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anna. Whakalofalahi atu, kia ora tātou. My name is Josh Riley. I'm an assistant analyst in the electricity distribution business team. That's Ben's team here at the Commission. In this session 3, we'll be running through some of the the illustrative examples for potential INTSA scheme design on the next slide, before engaging with you around some key discussion topics. You'll see there's a few sort of key topics that we've just got down there for to prompt discussion. In particular, we're really keen to hear about projects that you as EDBs might be wanting to undertake or maybe considering undertaking for DPP4. But in general, we're really keen to hear any and all feedback related to the illustrative options. Next slide, please, Rach. Thank you. So firstly, I must stress these are purely illustrative. Our intention here is to receive as much feedback from you as possible, rather than push information at you, but we wanted to have something for you to sink your teeth into and to engage with. And we're still at the drawing board phase, as has been mentioned by Ben. And so we're keen to hear as much from you as possible around these illustrative options. Whether you think they look all right, what works, what doesn't, what combination of characteristics you think works, or whether you think the whole thing needs to be scrapped. We're keen to hear from you. So we do have a few working assumptions. Firstly, This table's designed to illustrate the potential scope. It's just speaking to the fact that these are illustrative. I think I've harped on that enough. We could build an INTSA scheme that could cater for a range of projects, which could potentially be at different stages or have different requirements. This more so just speaks to the assumption below that, which is that the options would not be mutually exclusive. The IMs have given us, a lot of freedom and flexibility to design a INTSA scheme, that we see fit for DPP4, or DPP rather, I should say. And that could include 1, 2, 3 schemes as been mentioned, or potentially no scheme if we think that's most appropriate. Yeah, so we've touched on this a little bit, but we think that any INTSA scheme should have learning shared or required to be disseminated in some form. So we've already heard quite a bit back about that, which is great. I guess my question to you guys now is, how exactly would, how should we do that? Would it be best for the Commission to administer that? Or would there be benefit in aligning the INTSA projects to perhaps like the ENA's Future Network Forum, or something, one of the forums with the EEA, or Flex Forum or Flex Talk? And then last assumption, you'll see under supporting evidence, there is a project, or each option A, B, and C has a project eligibility assessment, a PEA. This is illustrative only, but we have this to show how we think that any INTSA project should be able to demonstrate potential benefits to consumers. And in this case, we've got a PEA used, or the tool used for that, but we think there's potentially, multiple methods by which you could demonstrate that potential benefit to consumers. Cool. So I'll stop here just for questions or comments on anything I've said so far before jumping into the options themselves. If you've got a question, raise your hand or chuck it in the chat below.
Gone awfully quiet there, Josh.
Maybe
Oh, there's a hand up. Dale's got it.
Dale.
I'm just a question around the suggestion that pretty much everything that needs to be signed off by an EDB director. I know, in the normal course of work, we have our delegated authority policies in place, and potentially, as you were talking earlier about maybe staging projects, which would obviously make them each stage smaller. Some of those dollars wouldn't normally go to our boards. And we might have other structures in place, like steering committees for programs of work around flexibility, those sorts of things, and whether we could have that sign off at a lower level in our business.
Yeah, I mean, we appreciate that feedback. The sort of thinking behind that was just that we would anticipate that a PEA should probably be signed off by someone with relatively senior, but I do appreciate that feedback, and we'll take that suggestion on board.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing, Dale, for us is really interesting. We'd be really keen to hear from you that level that you think from an EDB point of view gives the certainty to us that I guess risks are being managed around the appropriateness of the expenditure for consumers against unnecessary admin burden, which is something we've touched on a wee bit here. So definitely, if you think director level is too much and there's a kind of middle ground, really keen to go for that, or at least consider it. I should be clear actually at this stage.
Yeah. I mean, as an example, in the significant programs of work that we have running, there's usually more than one GM on a steering committee. So perhaps that's a more appropriate level.
Yep, no, that's a really good shout. And we might come back to you actually when we get further down the implementation stage to bounce some ideas around on that.
More than welcome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dale. Cool.
And it was saying, Josh said this, we've tried to really be pushy in terms of the options that are on here, in terms of trying to do things that we think maybe probably won't work in some areas, but to try and get ideas back from you and responses from you. So I see Scott to that end has got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Scott from Wellington Electricity. I really like this. I think the challenge might be in defining what a project type might be as a way to, I guess, funnel things down the right path. So, for example, I think flexibility payments, and I think this is well covered in our submission, so I won't bang on too long, but I think flexibility payments is a good example of something we can make relatively certain and might be quite a high volume churn for submissions, or sorry, applications for allowances. But again, I like this because you could quite easily have that as a D if it didn't fit in something else to make even more streamlined. So yeah, I think some cool thinking.
And that's a really good shout. I think for us, we've played with a few different things we wanted to put up here, and there is an option where you put something that's relatively certain and low risk with relatively high funding as a share of the cost of the project with relatively low admin burdens, and it is just a high churn kind of, if you're doing this thing that we all agree is right but isn't quite BAU, maybe we want to push it down that path.
Or in that example where the iris doesn't work over multiple regulatory periods, like you pointed out earlier, and where as an industry we can probably come up with calculators and methods to actually even streamline that process even more. Yeah, I think this gives some really good flexibility around that. It's cool.
Okay, thanks very much, Scott. Yeah, I think, Evie, if you don't mind, we'll come back to you. I'll go through the actual options themselves, and then we'll come back for a discussion session after. Cool. So you can see, so in terms of the option generally, or the table generally, that leftmost column has got 5 characteristics, not including that risk burden. You know, this is slightly different from the 8 characteristics which Hannah talked about a few slides ago, and that we published in the issues paper. We haven't done away with the other 3. We've just condensed them into 5 sort of key characteristics that we think sort of highlight the trade-offs best, and particularly between these illustrative options. And Scott, to your point, I wanted to highlight that the project type, yeah, these are just purely indicative. We don't necessarily think that only these or even any of these should form the basis of a project type definition. We just wanted to sort of, again, give you something to sink your teeth into. Options you can kind of see are generally shown in a step-up style fashion. So broadly, as permissible expenditure increases, there is greater protections for consumers. But I'll cover a bit more about this trade-off as we jump into the options. And then lastly, that bottom row, Anna talked about it in her session, the risk burden for consumers. That bottom row highlighted in red is a short sentence or two which just explains how we think the risk burden has been managed based on the combination of characteristics for each option. Cool. So option A, you can see it's similar to the IPA in terms of the permissible expenditure, but it's quite a bit more accessible. You can see, you know, or it could be potentially for research projects or feasibility studies, potentially, you know, small flexibility trials. But it's the general idea behind option A is to improve accessibility, and just, yeah, and for that reason, we think that the supporting evidence would only probably need to be a PEA. And that's because you've got a pretty small scale scheme with the permissible expenditure. And because of that, you're likely to have projects that are probably going to be less risky. And we think that the risk burden to consumers in this case, or in this scenario, is probably limited because of those reasons, and the share of recoverable costs could be therefore quite high. Option B, you can see there's a bit of a step up in terms of permissible expenditure. And as a result, the share of recoverable costs in this scenario has been lowered a bit. That's to sort of incentivize efficient expenditure and to make sure EDBs have a bit more skin in the game. This option potentially could be for, you know, actual field tests or prototype development. But again, you know, project type, it's just indicative. You can see that in the supporting evidence for option B, there's the reintroduction of the idea for the independent expert sign-off, as well as a couple of conditions for receipt of expenditure. And so in terms of option B, the trade-off we think is, you know, you've got a bit higher or quite a bit higher permissible expenditure. And with that, you're probably likely to have probably higher risk projects. And the way that we've managed the greater risk of those to consumers is by the conditions for receipt of expenditure, the supporting evidence, and slightly lower share of recoverable costs. In terms of option C, this one differs from the previous two in that key sort of characteristic is that condition for receipt of expenditure, where full costs are approved subject to net benefit to consumers being achieved. And in this case, with such a large permissible expenditure, you know, let's say it's akin to a reopener, we think that with so much of that permissible expenditure on offer, there would have to be some pretty stringent consumer protections. And in this case, that's mainly that condition for receipt of expenditure. And because it's such a stringent, you know, condition, the share of recoverable costs could be increased back up to 90%. And overall, the risk burden for consumers is probably quite small, mitigated mainly by that condition and the supporting evidence. You know, noting that in this case, the EDB probably does bear the majority of the risk. Cool, Rach, can you jump to the next slide, please? Sweet as. We've got a few sort of discussion topics here with some example questions. In particular, we are really keen to hear about the types of projects that you might want to be doing for DPP4, and whether you think that the illustrative options would accommodate those kinds of projects, and if not, why not, and how can we improve them? Also, we'd be keen to hear about you know, internal or other challenges, internal hurdles that you see undertaking innovation and non-traditional solutions projects. And how do you see an INTSA helping to overcome those challenges, and whether or not those illustrative examples help to overcome those challenges? And again, if not, why not? And how could we improve them? So I'll throw it over to the floor. Again, keen to hear about any questions or comments regarding the illustrative examples. And if you need us to go back to the previous slide, please just say so. Yes, Evie, we'll come back to you.
Cool, thanks guys. It was just a question, if you don't mind flicking back to the previous slide. So I think the bands make sense. The only column I wasn't too sure about was the project type, mostly because some projects, some of those phases are fairly integrated, and a good example of that would be our ResiFlex project, where we have quite tightly integrated the research phase with the development of prototypes. But it's still a really quite a small scale project, and so I think it would be more fit for the type of criteria that you've designed in option A. So I was just wondering whether maybe rather than the nature of the type of project, it's more about the scale of the project, so that you could do similar to the Strategic Innovation Fund in the UK, you could do like a small pilot discovery, and then you look to kind of scale that up once you've got some insight as to whether it's working or not.
Yep, that's great feedback. As you know, particularly around defining the project type by the scale, we'll definitely go away and think about that for our policy design. Yeah, I just reiterate, the examples given in the project type are just completely indicative, and we don't think that they should form criteria. Yeah, the basis of that definition there.
And I think that's a really good catch there. Is that we were just kind of thinking it's a small amount of money with a high funding share. You could use it for a trial that's relatively high risk for the EDB, but because the amount of money on offer is still relatively low, it will deliver good learnings that can then be applied and scaled afterwards in a different type of project. But we're not saying it'd be constrained to that. Indeed, I don't think we've actually had a conversation in much detail around putting project type as a criteria for an application. So thanks Evie for flagging that, and how you guys think about scaling that as well.
It'd be good, Evie, to sort of come up with some and provide some ideas to what could be project types and assessment, because you guys have done some good work on different ones.
Yeah, I was more thinking that this sort of scale would be probably a better representation, so that you can test some things at a really small scale, like do learning by doing, rather than having to necessarily always do a research phase as well, because some instances it is actually better just to give it a crack and kind of get stuck in.
And that's I think what we're looking at.
So are you thinking?
Sorry, Sean.
Are you thinking
I think that's what we're looking at with the permissible expenditure and recoverable cost share. Is that exactly it? It's a small amount of money available in total, so maybe 0.1% maximum of your low or everyone you over DPP4, akin to the IPA in that sense. That's exactly that kind of thing we're thinking about there, Evie.
Yeah, and you could use it for a research project, a development project, or a demonstration project within that scale. Yep, cool.
Just on those scales, Evie, what sort of funding are you thinking when you sort of talk around scales?
Just drawing off UK examples, that's probably not as applicable here, or we might need to think about the appropriate scale, but things that were typically under £1 or £2 million would be done under A. That type of approach where it's a PEA and sort of self-governed, and then generally they'd be a bit smaller than that, so a smaller scale. And then once they got over that scale, you'd be looking at those other types of mechanisms, whether it was a competitive fund, or I guess what they've gone into now since I left was the strategic innovation fund, where it does have that phased approach. You've got your discovery, alpha and beta stages. So, and those would be typically, much larger projects, or projects that have got a little bit of evidence behind them already, so that you can actually demonstrate that they are good things to back and invest in.
Cool, thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Evie. Andre Botha, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and who you represent as well, please, before you start.
Thank you. I work for Vector. Just a quick question I have is, with the C category there, will that be catering for projects that go over multiple years, or even over DPP periods? Because one of the limitations currently is, if you want to do a project where you want to create, for instance, capability in the market to support the network, but it is a multi-year process. Is that something you've thought about or contemplating?
I maybe touching, just given you're also from Vector, Andre, I just want to check that the Vector guys in the room and Kawakawa don't have anything to add on top before we answer your question, or if it's a separate question that you guys got your hand up for.
Ours is a separate question, so.
Okay, I'll go back to Andre first. Then I guess it's an interesting one. I would be interested to hear a bit more about that in your submissions as well. A lot of it will come down to, I guess, the nature of the risk and the nature of the project and the nature of the impact it's having as well. So the extent to which you're looking at building out a market over multiple years, and this is something we've engaged well with some EDBs on for the IPA, is looking at the IPAs working in stages. So you can have a multi-period project, for example, with stages funded through an allowance, rather than looking at kind of funding the entire project through allowance. As you gain learnings, you might pivot and might change direction. For something that is a large network redefining project, that's where maybe a CPP is starting to look more attractive. For something that's maybe a little bit smaller than that, we'd question, again, this is the nature of that project. If the risk is limited, maybe it's not an INSTA-based project. Maybe it's something actually that you start with INSTA to build out, and then you move to a phase of actually rolling that out through your OPEX or your CAPEX allowance, potentially.
Thank you.
Kawakawa, Victor?
Just unmuting, sorry for that. Yeah, just a question around the benefits assessment. So would the benefits assessment go beyond price and quality? So just thinking there around other benefits that consumers could get from an innovation project, like it might have help reduce carbon emissions. So just wondered if it's just limited to assessing a quality or price impact to consumers, or you'd look at sort of some broader aspects. And an example of that would be climate.
So I think the core of our answer will always come back to regulated line services at the end of the day, and we'd definitely be looking at that as a priority from the benefit as well. We do have a couple of ComCom lawyers on the call who will jump in if I'm overstretching my remit a little bit, but I think our obligations to having a regard for climate impacts, but our core will remain price and quality benefits. And I think we'll take a fairly, this is an innovation allowance, so we'll try and take a fairly aggressive, might not be the word, but definitely a risk-based and forward-looking approach to interpreting where those benefits could be found. So you certainly wouldn't find us saying, well, this isn't going to deliver a cost saving or a quality benefit to consumers in the next year. So therefore, it's not within scope. You could be looking at some kind of benefits that are hard to ascertain that are maybe 5-6 years down the track across multiple regulatory periods, as Scott was touching on before. In that case, it would be harder to get a fix on how to quantify those benefits, but we would still be looking at them as coming back to that regulated line service as being the core of what we'll be looking to achieve.
And just building on that, then I'd assume what would then be in play would be if you had a project that maybe reduce the cost to a small group of consumers. So say consumers that are suffering energy hardship, then that, so I suppose making things affordable, but not for all consumers, just a small subset of consumers that would be picked up as a benefit.
To an extent, but I guess we're coming back to this being an innovation and non-traditional solutions scheme, Richard, which is where I'd be more. So I guess it's a core driver of the benefits we want to assess would not just be that it's reducing energy hardship, because this isn't an energy hardship scheme at the end of the day. It's a scheme about driving innovative and non-traditional solutions. So we'd certainly be interested in where those schemes would deliver benefits for consumers who are suffering from energy hardship. But if the sole benefit was around energy hardship and there wasn't actually much evidence of you doing anything innovative or non-traditional, so say flexibility or demand-side management, that would be, and again, we're at the early stages and we're beginning to talk about it, but that would be where I have more concerns, speaking, I guess, as a policy official when designing this intervention.
Yeah, I was thinking of like if you could enable energy efficiency in a subset of your consumers would be an example of where that helps with affordability, but maybe only available to a small subset of consumers. It doesn't have to be available to all consumers.
Yeah, that's definitely good. So I think the question around availability and scope is an interesting one. Rather than, so if I don't dive into the kind of the core area around energy efficiency or benefits to an individual group of consumers, definitely I think you could say targeting or limiting eligibility at an early stage would be something we'd be open to. I guess that's within the realms of kind of existing competition law and things like that as well, of course, making sure that all consumers are being treated fairly. It's an interesting one. I'd be keen to talk to you a bit more about it, to be honest, as the kind of project you'd be thinking about, because I can't see it off the top of my head being kind of within the top priorities we'll be looking at to fund within the scheme, but definitely not something that we've ruled out in our policy conversations. Is my middle ground answer I'm going to give you at this stage.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Thanks, guys. I think Russell Shaw is up next. Or Tim, did you want to come in with something?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, especially on the first one around quality, is that just to remind people that the perspective on quality is that quality is quite broad. So obviously when we're under DPPs, we're focused on reliability, the SAIDI and SAFE measures of quality, but quality is quite broad. It's not everything, but there is more to it than just reliability. So, projects that increase the speed or smoothness of new connections, for example, that's something that could kind of fit within quality potentially. So I just wanted to remind you this, it's not just reliability. So there's other things you might be thinking that could be measured as a quality benefit.
Thanks, Tim. Cool. Okay. Well,
A few more questions.
Yeah, we've got a few more questions. So Russell Shaw.
Hi there. Yeah, just had a comment around the permissible expenditure and having it based on a percentage of the maximum allowable revenue. Now, clearly that varies significantly between the companies. Based on the last ideas, Vector are sitting about 612 million, Orion at 230 million, and Top about 42 million. So that gives you a range from a 3 million investment fund down to 200,000 for the same option. So I just encourage you to think about whether it's just a percentage of the maximum allowable revenue or whether you actually have a dollar value in there too.
That's useful, and it's something we looked at with the reopeners when they were redesigned as part of the IN, or essentially a core function of their eligibility criteria. We do have both thresholds and so absolute dollar values and thresholds based on percentages. So we'll definitely look at that. It also looks like the weather is about as bad up north for us as it is in Wellington today.
I hope so. I'm coming to Wellington this afternoon. A lot better than Scotland. Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. Rachel.
Kia ora koutou, Rachel Bellisingham from Unison. I was just wondering about consumer engagement, noting the low cost of the DPP, but whether you'd talked about that being a part of PEA or the criteria you'd be looking to meet.
We haven't as yet talked about what would exactly constitute a PEA, but
in consumer engagement, I think this is a scalable thing almost in a sense. If you're looking at quite a small value project, I'd say consumer engagement is far less important than if you're looking at spending a significant share of additional revenue. And another thing that could come in there is the nature of the projects. Coming back to quality, if you're looking at one of the things we consulted on in the issues paper was around, and this is something I touched on earlier with Richard's question, sandboxing around quality regulations. So if you're looking at maybe a project that could be toning down quality standards in a particular area to enable you to run an innovation project, I'd personally be quite keen to see that consumers in the area were signed up to the fact that they were going to experience different outcomes. So it's certainly not something we'd want to use as a blunt instrument, coming back to our admin burden point around a de facto level of engagement required for all projects, purely because I think the nature of those projects will vary. And it's something we are trying to, as you know, Rachel, as well, encourage EDBs to look at on the basis of their individual consumer groups and their consumers. You guys know your consumers better than we do. What we want is the confidence that you know what your consumers are after longer term and can give us the confidence that you're delivering and that in line with their interests. There's no cookie cutter, I guess, requirement for you to meet in that sense around here that we're looking at.
Thank you.
We're just conscious of, we've got around 20 minutes left and we've got an open discussion session coming up. We've got a few questions we've lined up with the team in the background as well that I might lob in, but I'll pass back to Josh now before we open up the floor again for any more questions you might have. That's all right?
Yep. So yeah, if anyone has any further questions around any of these discussion topics, again, particularly around the kinds of projects that you want to be doing or other challenges, please let us know. But we will throw it over to the final session now. So Rach, thank you. And I'll pass it over to Ben. But again, just if you have any questions or any comments or feedback, now's the time to fire them through.
So this is basically our open discussion session. So I'm just going to swap the mics over with Josh as well. Just give me 1 second. So this is basically our open discussion session, your last chance for final thoughts. We'll probably spend around 10-15 minutes maximum here, I think. Just checking I'm not getting in trouble for saying that, so that's good. There's a few things I'll jump on, a few people we would like to push to jump in with comments and thoughts as well, who we might not have heard from. So before I start kind of running around, has anyone got anything else they'd like to throw out? Anything they'd like to test with other members, other stakeholders are on the call potentially as well? This is kind of an open discussion where it's not just about hearing from us. We're conscious that there's a few different parties who'd be interested in running these kind of projects. So just kind of flowing the floor open for a second. Cool, in which case I might just do a little question from one of our economists around the recoverable cost. So one thing for us is with the potential for big benefits, including potentially in unregulated markets, be sufficient to offset a low recoverable amount. So if you're looking at a project that was potentially quite risky, we would offer a little bit of funding towards that, but the benefits could be quite substantial and they would accrue largely to that EDB. Still working within the definition of a regulated line service. Would that influence your decision making? If you look at the IPA, for example, we're funding 50% of quite a small amount of a project. And so while the benefits there might accrue solely to the EDB, the amount of money that was going into it might mean that actually the benefits wouldn't be substantial at that early stage. Keen for any kind of comments around how attractive just big benefits outside of the core regulatory regime might be for you in order to deliver a project. Or not potentially. Diego, did you want to expand on your question?
Yeah, while people perhaps think about that, yeah, I guess this is the moment to just, I guess, be brave and unshackle our minds, if you like, and say, hey, there's no requirement for 90% to be the limit. My view is it could be 150%, it could be 200% of the expenditure, but that needs to work together with the risk. So at the core of this is the risk reward sort of equation or trade-off, right? And so when you think about a very risky project, then you probably need a high reward for it to be worthwhile. But that depends on whether you are bearing the risk, EDB, or whether the risk is allocated to consumers. And if it's allocated to the EDB, or mostly to the EDB, then the reward comes in different forms, right? It could be the share of expenditure that is covered, but it could also be that the potential net benefits are huge because you can tap on regulated markets and sell your successful innovation to others. Or it could be that actually the benefits for the regulated service are huge as well, and you can save, and reduce your capex by 30% or something. So all of that has to work together, and I guess it's not. Yeah, we should think more broadly about that. But yeah, so I guess the question was, we heard a couple of people, I think Susanna from Vector, saying that the recoverable amount it's important, and if it's not high enough, it may be a barrier. But I was just asking the question whether the extent to which you consider all those other things.
And this is maybe demonstrating that we are trying to share some of our early stage thinking here around. So do feel free to log anything in, and in the interim, if you want to drop anything in the chat as well. Really keen to hear it. Oh, Andre, go for it.
Yeah. Hi, Diego. Good to see you again. It's a interesting question you've asked there, and I'm struggling to get my head around it because when we think of these projects and when we thought about it in the past, we were just thinking about what benefits we could bring to electricity consumers. We did not think of raising projects that maybe, become sort of revenue outside the regulatory part of Vector. So it's a fascinating question. I haven't thought of it. I think when we raised the question about the funding, it's purely just that the 50% is very fixed, and to your point, when does it not become fixed? And it certainly relates to Russell's challenge on the how you set the upper end of that contribution based on the MAR as well, because you can imagine for a small arms company that is a severe limitation in terms of what they can do, because the cost of these projects is hardly ever related to the size of the business, as we all know. So it's a fascinating question. I haven't thought about it, but I think I just wanted to sort of give you the assurance that most of the projects that I've heard about being discussed, at most it is, well, shall we use, to the previous question, a related party to do the work. I've not heard any EDB talk about, hey, listen, we can do this, and if it works, it can become a non-regulated revenue. There will be opportunities like that, but we are so generally cautious to keep that wall in place, so that there's no sharing or inadvertent benefit into that part of the business. But I guess it will be it would be nice to have that option. But I don't know if any other lines company on the call have ever thought of it like that. But I certainly have never seen the innovation allowance or what the future of it may look like in that space.
And that's a really good point, Andre, in the sense that, like, for us, this is the time. The 50% cap was locked in under DPP3. This is the time now to come forward with different ideas. And ultimately, we're still looking at delivering a core benefit within the regulated line service. But we're trying to demonstrate here with Diego's question that we're not averse to the fact that it might be other additional benefits that are good for you as a business as well. And this is the thing, I think, if you talk to some of the EDBs that have applied kind of innovation, non-traditional solutions to their businesses, a lot of it is based on effectively borrowing or paying for ideas that other EDBs internationally have come up with and applying those. And that is technically a source of revenue for those international EDBs that are developing those learnings as well. I'll just quickly touch on Dale's point, and that's actually a really interesting one that we hadn't had in the criteria around the timing of when the cash is recovered as well. And that's actually something we should definitely think about within the criteria as a way of giving some certainty or more of an incentive around taking on board some risk if you can get the return or get the cost recovered faster, that's something I'd definitely be keen to think about within our team over the next few weeks. So thanks for flagging that one. We've got another hand up in the background. I think I saw. Was that Rhino?
Yes, thank you. I mean, a bit like Andre, I'm actually quite surprised at Diego at your question, because I mean, I would have thought that there's quite a clean line here between what would be in the regulated business and what should be open to competition. And certainly our view is you don't want to overstep the mark and use the regulated business to then sort of enter into something which really we believe should be in the competitive market. So likewise, we would not have looked at this as a sort of the vessel about how we make additional money. In fact, I'd turn it around and say that one of the primary reasons for doing innovative work would be to actually try to reduce the capex, particularly, so have better asset utilization, etc. So in a way, you actually more likely to reduce your revenue going forward than have opportunity to increase it if we play strictly by the rules. So.
And yeah, just to clarify, I mean, I think it was mentioned by Ben and others. I mean, when thinking about the benefits, we are by law required to think about the benefits of the consumers of the regulated service. But when you think about potential projects, and this was brought up by, I think, Richard earlier, you know, there could be third parties, or there could be other unregulated parties that are interested in a project that within the scope of the project has benefits that are for the regulated consumer, but it also has wider benefits. And so we wouldn't want to be a barrier for this project happening if, you know, the project has benefits for consumers of the regulated service. But there will be, yeah, I'm thinking out loud here, but we'll have to think carefully about the allocation of costs, you know, to prevent cross-subsidization and competition issues with the unregulated competitive space. Yeah.
Russell, did I see your hand up and down in the background?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to help, but we invested in diesel generation in the far north of our region as a non-network solution. It went on the RAB, and obviously we have the ability to sell that into the market at periods of high price. And when we do, we recover that revenue. It's above our regulated income, and then it balances out over time with the consumer. So it is an example where we've created an unregulated revenue stream, but ultimately it drives down the cost to the consumer over time.
Appreciate you throwing that one in here. And that is definitely kind of the stage we're thinking at here, is if we can get examples like those logged in, that really does help us think about some of the different scenarios we might want to be designing for. And I should emphasize at this stage as well, I think this element of discussion is more, as Diego started with, ripping the shackles off a little bit and looking a bit more creatively at what we could do. It's certainly not what we think necessarily the core of an INTSA might achieve, but if there are a few EDBs with projects they've been thinking about and want to have a chat to us about them, and making sure that actually we've designed our scheme to enable those sorts of projects that could deliver those benefits for consumers within the regulated line service, but they're a bit worried about some of the grey areas, we're happy to have a chat to them, absolutely. So thanks, Russell. I'd say I've probably got another minute or two before I need to start wrapping up. Keen if any of the so I know I appreciate, John, you came on before, but if any of the other EDB non-EDB based stakeholders on the call have got any questions or anything they'd like to throw in, any challenges they've had potentially working with EDBs over the last 4 years under the or the last 5 years under the DPP3 scheme, that would be something that would be of interest for us to hear more about.
So Terry, if you're there, Terry Paddy, good time for you here, if you're still there.
Oh my goodness, you're making me hunt round for the mute button. It's not ideal.
Excellent.
No,
you've got a lot of experience in this area, and you've been around and you're seeing a lot through the Flex Forum and that.
So this is really great. And as a sort of, I follow on from John Campbell's comments earlier on, and as a third-party supplier of services at the grid edge that are about optimizing the grid, heavily involved in Project Flex Talk and things like that. I guess what I'm getting out of it from that outside is that this is an enabler for EDBs to take some risk out and look at some of these objectives that could be achieved by widening the scope from just their traditional solution models and looking at other outside parties. So I've got nothing more to add than this is an excellent step, and I look forward to working with some EDBs around some potential future projects on it. How's that for an advertising pitch?
What about some of your learnings, Terry? And these innovative projects, what are some of your learnings to getting them off the ground? Barriers, challenges?
It's really easy if an EDB has an idea and comes to you. It's really hard if you have an idea and go to an EDB. The issues for small innovative companies is that the speed at which things move is so slow that if you're not careful, your innovation will have disappeared over the 12 months you're writing business cases and filling in forms and doing stuff. So the issue is more around, we've been doing this stuff for over 10 years and the traction has been next to nothing. You know, it's great to see that the traction is now quite considerable on the utility side, on the EDB side. So it's a hard journey, and you need tools like this to make innovation occur. And I agree with, I look overseas, comments that EB had made, I look overseas at the UK, I look at Australia, I look at their innovation funds, I look at what they're doing, I look at the open access to information, and we just need to be doing that here, funding innovation to get ahead of the game. I'll stop because this is off topic probably.
No, I think it's useful, and that's exactly what we wanted to get people who aren't EDBs talking. So appreciate Sean for calling you out, Terry, there as well. And I think this comes back to the maybe me doing a wee bit of a wrap up before I pass to Josh. Is there is a balance here within the fact that our regime is substantially more flexible than what you see in Australia and what you see in the UK in terms of where EDBs can allocate their funding. So the need for a substantial innovation specific fund is different here to what you might see overseas just because of that flexibility. But you also touch on another point which is really important for us, is how we can share those learnings and build that momentum, and that's something we think is key, and we appreciate the feedback from EDBs about the IPA potentially and the difficulty with just getting that signed off. That was supposed to be a kind of light touch, easy scheme, and that didn't quite work as we anticipated initially, which is why we made a pivot midway through. And the final point in there as well is we're really conscious there's a lot going on in the sector right now that isn't as advertised as it could be, and there's some really, really good stuff in terms of using non-traditional solutions and demand-side management flexibility services to save consumers money now in the current regulatory period, which is great to see, and we want to make sure we're championing that and making sure this scheme, the learning side of that, as you were touching on, Terry, is really big as a way of delivering on that. I saw one more hand pop up. Was that John? Excellent. Thanks, John. We'll take this as the last question if that's okay, but please feel free to drop stuff in the chat, and also, of course, as Josh will get to submissions.
Yeah, sure. It's just a bit of a challenge and a question, I guess, something to what you just said, Ben. I mean, that view is expressed quite often that the New Zealand regime, or ComCom's regime, is a lot more flexible than what's overseas, and therefore there should be. But the reality is there's a lot less happening in New Zealand in the innovation space in this area than what is happening overseas. So I really challenge the sort of, ComCom to think about, well, why is that the case? Yeah, we've got apparently what we have on paper, a flexible regime, but it's not being used. And I don't think, my observation, and I think Terry's observation, is it's not being used as ComCom might think it is. So I really challenge you to think about why that is. I don't necessarily have the answers, but yeah, we state that. And look, I'm a former employee of ComCom about 10 years ago, and we had the same view then. Yeah. Yeah. I know where it comes from. Yeah, I just think we need to be a bit more self-reflective on, is it actually as flexible as we think it is? Yeah.
And I think really appreciate John coming in with that, and it's a nice way for us to end, to be honest, in the sense of this is what we're trying to do with INTSA is look at really where those barriers lie, and another way of looking at it is maybe flexibility within the regime is not the barrier, and so therefore what are we trying to tackle? And that comes down to, again, those questions around maybe quantum of funding isn't so much the barrier as much as how ease of access, how it helps boards make decisions, how we can help draw international learnings. And so I think that's definitely some of the thinking the team's been looking at. It's been great also having Anna over from Ofgem to help kind of drag some of those learnings from the UK as well, because yeah, you put your finger on it. You know, we've had flexible regime. The nature of the DPP is a flexible regime, but there are still some concerns around the level of innovation. The one thing I would say again is we are seeing some really good stuff here still as well, and that is there's the nature of having 16 price quality regulated EDBs, 29 all up, is that some of that innovation gets a bit lost in the wash compared to the UK. We got 6, and you can kind of go, cool. Is it 6 in the UK? 6
groups.
Yeah, 6 groups, and you can kind of go, cool. What are the 6 doing? It's pretty easy to champion it. So there's that kind of, sorry, as a Kiwi who's lived in Australia and the UK, everyone in Australia is like, oh, what are the Kiwis and what are the Brits doing? The Brits are looking at what the Australians and the Kiwis are doing, and then here we're saying everyone's better than us. There is an element of pausing and actually saying we are doing some good stuff here as well, but genuinely, I really appreciate you ending with that challenge, because I think that's why we're here having this workshop today, and that hits the nail on the head for me. So really appreciate that.
Thank you.
In which case, I'm going to pass over to Josh now to take us through to the final stage and the final slides.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. I'll just start by saying a huge thank you to everyone for participating in this workshop. It's really helpful to engage with you all in a different kind of format, such as a workshop, as opposed to, through submissions, which is often the case. And you've given us quite a bit to go back and think about. And so, I hope that this was as valuable for you all as it was or has been for us. Going forward, there are some key dates you should be made aware of if you're not already. Soon after this workshop, we'll get the recording published, and potentially some notes published on the website with accommodating that. And then Tuesday, 19th of March, by 5 p.m. will be submissions for this workshop will be due. And I'll touch on that a little bit more on the next slide. This is a key date for you all. So sometime by the end of May 2024, we'll have our DPP4 draft decision reasons paper and determination published. And then sometime in June 2024, we'll have submissions for that. Reasons paper will be due. And then again, sometime in July 2024, the cross subs for that paper will be due. So as soon as we know what the specific date for that publication of the reasons paper is, we'll communicate that to you. And then that in turn will get some specific dates for the submissions for that paper and then the cross subs as well. We will have some other targeted engagements that are ongoing, and as they come up, we'll communicate that to you. And then lastly, by the end of November, we have a statutory deadline to release or publish the final determination and final decisions paper, reasons paper rather, for the DPP4, and that will not have a submissions period as those decisions are final. Next slide, please. Thank you. As for submissions to this paper, or this workshop rather, please get those to us by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the 19th of March. If you had any further comments or views that you either wanted to reiterate or didn't get a chance to present. I will just add that if you are able to, we'd really, really appreciate if you get any of those submissions to us sooner than that 5 p.m. Tuesday, 19th of March deadline. As you can see, May is coming up pretty quickly, and yeah, everything's rolling around very fast. So,
and if I could just jump in on that as well, we're really, as you hopefully saw in this workshop here, really open-minded as to how we get your feedback. We do have to publish your submissions online, unless of course there's confidential material. But from speaking to the team, like if it's a list of ideas that you want to go and drop down, go for it. If it's just some questions that you want us to consider in a relatively short form, absolutely keen to hear that as well. We're also open to kind of bilateral conversations if you just like to have a chat and share some thoughts.
Yeah.
Really, really keen just to get your ideas in whatever form's easiest. We're conscious. We've looked at a list of the submission deadlines that we have across the DPP4 project over the next month, and we're conscious we're asking a lot from you. So really keen to emphasise this doesn't need to be any more than you need to get your information across the line to us.
Yeah. Yep. And then, so if you did want to provide a submission, please get that to Ben Woodham, Electricity Distribution Manager, under the email address below, and include that submission on EDB DPP4 Innovation and Non-Traditional Solutions Workshop is the subject line of your email. And if possible, please include both a format suitable for word processing, just like a Word doc, as well as a locked format like a PDF. Both copies in your submission, if that's all right, so we can publish on our website. I will now close this session with a karakia. Ko mutu a mātou mahi mō tēnei wā, manaki tia mai, mātou katoa, o mātou hoa, o mātou whānau, ai o ki te aorangi. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Monday.